A test of faith. Emily and Daniel Carter had always believed in the power of faith. Raised in devout Catholic families, they built their marriage on the foundation of prayer, trust, and unwavering devotion to God. When their baby girl, Ava, was born, she became the light of their lives. But that light dimmed when she was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of leukemia at just 5 months old. Doctors were grim in their prognosis. Ava's immune system was weak, and traditional treatments were not showing promising results. Emily and Daniel were heartbroken, but they refused to give up. They turned to their faith, praying for a miracle. It was then that they heard the news that Pope Francis would be visiting Washington, D.C. for a special gathering. As devoted Catholics, the thought of being in the presence of the Pope filled them with hope. Perhaps, if Ava could receive a blessing, God might grant them the miracle they desperately prayed for. But the odds of meeting the Pope were slim. The crowd would be massive, and security would be tight. They had no connections, no special invitations, just faith and a dream. Part 2. A glimpse of hope. One evening, Emily's older brother, Thomas, called with unexpected news. Thomas, a respected police officer, had been assigned as part of the security team for the Pope's motorcade. "I can't promise anything," he told Emily, "but I might be able to get you close enough to see him." Emily and Daniel saw this as a sign from God. They prepared for the trip, packing Ava's medicines and making sure she was well protected from infections. The journey to Washington, D.C. was both hopeful and nerve-wracking. When they arrived, the streets were packed with thousands of people, all eager for a chance to see the Pope. Thomas had managed to secure a spot near the barricades, where they had a clear view of the route the Pope's car would take. The moment finally arrived. The crowd erupted in cheers as Pope Francis's motorcade slowly approached. People waved flags, clutched rosaries, and reached out in hopes of catching his. 2 seconds. You said, "Continue part first, more unique and lengthy." ChatGPT said, "Here's the expanded and unique part 1 of your 6-part story." Part 1. A test of faith. Emily and Daniel Carter had built their lives on faith, love, and the belief that no storm was too strong for God's grace. From the moment they met in college, they knew their connection was something divine. Their shared devotion to Catholicism bound them together, and their love flourished under the teachings of compassion, hope, and prayer. Their marriage was blessed with a beautiful baby girl, Ava. From the moment she entered the world, she became the very center of their universe. With soft golden curls, bright blue eyes, and a contagious giggle, Ava radiated pure joy. Every night, Emily would rock her to sleep, humming soft hymns, while Daniel would gently kiss her forehead, whispering prayers of protection. But their world shattered when Ava was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia at just 5 months old. It had started with fevers that wouldn't subside, tiny bruises appearing on her delicate skin, and a tiredness no infant should ever feel. At first, Emily told herself it was just a passing illness, but when Ava's condition worsened, they rushed her to the hospital. The doctors ran tests, blood work, scans, biopsies. The results were devastating. The leukemia was aggressive, fast-moving. Traditional treatments had little effect. Chemotherapy had been initiated, but Ava's immune system was failing, and she was too weak for more invasive procedures. Emily collapsed into Daniel's arms the night the doctor delivered the news. "We will do everything we can," Dr. Patel had said, but the weariness in his eyes betrayed the truth. He had seen this before. The odds were against them. Emily wanted to scream, wanted to ask why. Why their baby? Why, after years of faith and devotion, would God allow this to happen? But in her despair, she clung to her beliefs. Faith was all they had left. A chance for a miracle. Daniel refused to give up. He spent his nights in the hospital chapel, kneeling before the cross, whispering desperate prayers. "Lord, if you can hear me, if you have ever listened, please, heal her. Give us a sign." Emily, though exhausted and frightened, stayed strong for Ava. She sang to her, read her scripture, and kissed her warm forehead, refusing to let fear consume her. Then, one morning, as Emily scrolled through her phone while sitting by Ava's hospital crib, she saw an announcement. Pope Francis was coming to Washington, D.C., for the World Meeting of Families. Her heart pounded. Emily had always admired Pope Francis for his kindness and humility. He had touched the lives of millions, blessing the sick, comforting the grieving, inspiring the faithless. She had heard stories of miraculous recoveries after his blessings. Could this be their answer? When Daniel returned from his morning prayer, she clutched his hands. The Pope is coming to D.C. next month. He frowned, not yet understanding. Emily swallowed hard. If we could just get Ava close enough. If he could bless her. She hesitated, not wanting to sound foolish. Maybe this is what we've been praying for. Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. The idea was impossible. The event would be massive, with thousands, maybe millions, of people attending. Security would be airtight. How could they possibly get their baby close enough? But looking down at Ava, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each labored breath, he knew they had to try. "We'll find a way," he said, his voice steady with conviction. "No matter what it takes." The impossible road. Getting into the event was the first challenge. The tickets were limited and demand was overwhelming. Daniel called everyone he knew, priests, parish members, even an old friend who worked for a local church organization. But no one had access. Days passed, and hope began to dwindle. Then, one evening, Emily's older brother, Thomas, called with unexpected news. "You won't believe this," he said breathlessly. "One of my old colleagues, he's working security for the event. He might be able to help." Emily clutched the phone. "Are you serious? He can get us in." "Maybe," Thomas said. "No promises, but he told me he'd try to get you both near the barricades where Pope Francis will be walking through the crowd." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance. For the next several weeks, Emily and Daniel prepared. They prayed harder than ever before, seeking strength and guidance. They packed Ava's medical supplies, ensuring they had everything needed for the trip. Emily wavered for a moment. Was it safe to take Ava into such a large crowd, given her fragile condition? The risk of infection was high, but so was the possibility of a miracle. Daniel saw the worry in her eyes and placed his hands over hers. God wouldn't leave us here if it wasn't meant to be. And so, with hope burning in their hearts, they set off for Washington, D.C. The journey begins. The city was alive with anticipation when they arrived. Pilgrims had traveled from all over the world to see the Pope. Streets were filled with banners, prayers, and songs of devotion. The air hummed with faith. Emily and Daniel stood near the barricades, cradling Ava in their arms. She was weak but awake, her tiny fingers grasping Emily's necklace, as if sensing the weight of the moment. The sun hung low in the sky when a murmur rippled through the crowd. Then, like a wave rolling through the sea, the energy shifted. "He's coming," someone whispered. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The Pope's motorcade slowly approached, the white Popemobile gleaming under the sun. The crowd surged forward in hushed awe, cameras raised, hands clasped in prayer. Emily's heart pounded. They were so close, but was it close enough? Daniel, without hesitation, lifted Ava above his head. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she saw her husband's hands trembling. His voice cracked as he called out, "Holy Father, our daughter, please." The Pope turned, and at that moment, everything changed. The moment that changed everything. Emily's breath hitched as Pope Francis turned toward them. The golden afternoon sunlight bathed his white robes, making him seem almost ethereal as he moved through the crowd, his hands reaching out to bless the faithful. The sea of people surrounding them stilled as if time itself had paused. Emily gripped Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve as he held Ava up. And then, a member of the Pope's security detail, A tall man in a crisp black suit stepped forward. For a moment, Emily's heart sank, thinking he would wave them off. Instead, the man's expression softened as he took Ava from Daniel's outstretched hands with practiced care. Gasps erupted around them as the security guard carried their frail daughter toward the Holy Father. Emily's knees nearly buckled. She clung to Daniel as she watched, her heart pounding against her ribs. Pope Francis, the leader of millions, the embodiment of faith itself, turned his kind eyes toward Ava. His face, lined with wisdom and compassion, broke into a gentle smile. He reached out and cradled the baby's head in his hands, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was a moment so powerful, so raw, that Emily could feel the collective breath of the crowd around her being held. As the Pope's lips touched Ava's soft skin, Emily swore she saw something unexplainable. It was as if a warmth radiated from his touch, an unseen force wrapping around her baby like a protective embrace. Pope Francis murmured a prayer, his voice low and reverent. Then, with great care, he lifted his head and met Emily and Daniel's eyes across the barrier. "Have faith," he said softly. "God is with you." Tears streamed down Emily's face. The security guard turned and gently placed Ava back into Daniel's waiting arms. The baby let out a soft coo, her tiny fingers twitching as she nestled against her father's chest. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Emily barely heard them. She could only stare down at her daughter, something deep within her whispering that something had changed. Something profound. A shift in the air. The journey back home was a blur. Emily and Daniel were still reeling from the experience, their hands trembling, their minds racing. In the car, Emily couldn't stop staring at Ava. She looked the same, fragile, small, wrapped in her soft pink blanket. But something was different. Her usually pale skin had a slight flush to it. Her breathing, which had always been shallow, seemed steadier. Daniel, ever the rational thinker, tried to temper their expectations. "It was a blessing," he said, glancing at Emily as he drove. "An incredible moment. But we should still follow the doctor's advice." Emily nodded but said nothing. She wanted to believe. She wanted to believe with every fiber of her being that something miraculous had just happened. That night, after putting Ava to sleep in her crib, Emily knelt beside her bed and prayed harder than she ever had before. "God, I don't know what your plan is," she whispered, "but please, please don't take her from us." She stayed there, listening to the soft rhythm of Ava's breathing, until exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep. 6 weeks later, Ava's next round of tests were scheduled for the following month. In the weeks leading up to them, something strange began happening. Ava, who had spent most of her days exhausted, barely able to lift her tiny arms, was suddenly more alert. One morning, Emily woke up to the sound of giggling. She bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering. Had she imagined it? No, there it was again. The soft, delicate laugh. She threw off the covers and ran to Ava's crib. And there she was, lying on her back, her bright blue eyes twinkling, her little hands reaching for the mobile above her head. Her face had color. Her cheeks were full. She looked healthy. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Daniel walked in, rubbing the sleep from his face. "What's wrong?" Emily turned to him, her hands pressed to her mouth. She stepped aside so he could see. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Oh my God," he whispered. For the first time in months, Ava didn't look sick. It was a slow transformation. Every day, she seemed to get a little stronger. Her fever, which had been persistent despite medication, was gone. The bruises on her skin faded. Her once labored breathing became steady and strong. Emily and Daniel watched in awe, barely daring to hope. Then came the day of the tests. The unbelievable truth. The hospital smelled the same. That sterile mix of antiseptic and bleach, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above them. Emily held Ava close, her hands trembling as they waited for the test results. Daniel sat beside her, gripping her knee, his leg bouncing up and down. Neither of them spoke. Then Dr. Patel walked in. The expression on his face was unreadable. He glanced down at the file in his hands, then up at them, his brows furrowed. Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. "Doctor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel exhaled sharply, then sat down in front of them. "I don't know how to explain this," he said, flipping the file open. "But Ava's cancer is gone." Silence. A heavy, consuming silence. Daniel blinked. "What?" Dr. Patel turned the test results toward them. Her latest scans show no trace of leukemia. No cancerous cells. It's as if the disease never existed. Emily let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth. Dr. Patel shook his head. "I've been a doctor for 30 years. I've seen some incredible recoveries. But this," he gestured toward the file, "this defies all logic. There's no medical explanation." Emily and Daniel turned to each other, their eyes wide with disbelief and overwhelming joy. Ava cooed softly in Emily's arms, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened. Daniel let out a breathless laugh, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. Emily kissed Ava's forehead, her tears falling freely. They both knew what had happened. It wasn't medicine. It wasn't luck. It was a miracle. And it had started with a single kiss. Whispers of a miracle. The words "no trace of leukemia" rang in Emily's ears like a church bell, reverberating through every inch of her being. She gripped Ava tighter, as if holding her baby closer would keep this moment real. Daniel was frozen beside her, his face pale. He blinked several times, his lips parting but no words coming out. Dr. Patel sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. He had spent decades delivering diagnoses, some hopeful, some devastating, but he had never seen anything like this. This doesn't make sense," he admitted. "We've been tracking Ava's leukemia for months. The last tests showed the cancer had spread." He shook his head. "And now, it's as if the disease never existed." Emily's heart pounded. "How is that possible?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Patel's face was etched with disbelief. "I don't know. I can't explain it." Daniel exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can." Emily turned to her husband, her eyes meeting his. The same realization, the same undeniable truth, passed between them. The Pope's kiss. A search for answers. The ride home from the hospital felt surreal. Emily kept stealing glances at Ava, half expecting to wake up from a dream. But it was real. Her daughter, who had been on the brink of death just weeks ago, now giggled softly, her rosy cheeks full of life. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Do you think?" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Do you think this really was a miracle?" Emily let out a shaky breath. What else could it be? They drove in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Then Daniel spoke again. "We should tell someone." Emily frowned. "Tell who?" He hesitated, then said, "The church." A call to the Vatican. The following morning, after a restless night of prayer and disbelief, Daniel made a call to their local church. Father Michael, their parish priest, had known about Ava's illness. He had visited their home multiple times, offering prayers and comfort. When Daniel explained what had happened, the priest fell silent. This is extraordinary," Father Michael murmured. "You must come see me immediately." They bundled Ava into the car and drove straight to the church. Father Michael met them in his office, his eyes wide with awe as he listened to their story. When they finished, he crossed himself and leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlocked. "The Vatican needs to hear this," he said. "If this truly is a miracle, it must be documented." Daniel swallowed. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Father Michael gave a small smile. "They will believe the truth. News spreads like wildfire. Within days, the local diocese had contacted officials in Rome. Journalists began catching wind of the story. It started with whispers in their small town, but soon, reporters were calling, knocking on their door, desperate for an interview. The baby miraculously healed after receiving a blessing from Pope Francis. Headlines flashed across newspapers and news stations. Emily and Daniel found themselves at the center of a media frenzy. Camera crews camped outside their home. Friends and strangers alike reached out, their voices laced with awe and curiosity. But not everyone was convinced. Some doctors called it a misdiagnosis. Others speculated that Ava's recovery was due to a sudden, rare remission. Skeptics flooded online forums, debating whether this was truly divine intervention or a bizarre medical anomaly. Yet none of them could explain it. The facts were undeniable. Ava had leukemia. It was spreading aggressively. Then, just 6 weeks after being kissed by the Pope, it was completely gone. Doubt creeps in. Emily sat on the couch, cradling Ava, staring at the TV screen. A well-known scientist was speaking on the news. "This is a remarkable case," he said. "But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Spontaneous remission is rare but not unheard of." Emily's grip on Ava tightened. "Do you think they're right?" she whispered. Daniel, sitting beside her, exhaled heavily. "I don't know, but does it matter?" Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Daniel reached over, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Ava is here. She's healthy. Whether people believe it was science or faith, does it change what we know in our hearts?" Emily blinked back tears. He was right. But something still nagged at her. If God had saved Ava, then why had he let her get sick in the first place? She had spent months begging for a cure, for hope, for a sign. Had this been the plan all along? Or had it been a test? A visit from the Vatican. A month later, an official from the Vatican arrived at their doorstep. Bishop Alessandro Romano had traveled from Rome to personally hear their testimony. Sitting in their living room, he listened intently, his expression unreadable. "We have investigated many claims of miracles," he finally said. "Few are validated, but what you are telling me, it is truly remarkable." He placed a gentle hand on Emily's. "If this is indeed a miracle, it means your daughter was chosen for something greater." Emily's heart clenched. "Chosen?" Bishop Romano nodded. "Miracles do not happen randomly. They are signs." Daniel exchanged a glance with Emily. "But why us?" The bishop smiled. "Perhaps that is a question only God can answer." The letter from Pope Francis. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Emily's hand shook as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. It was from the Vatican, from Pope Francis himself. "Dear Emily and Daniel, I have heard your story, and I am humbled by what has transpired. Faith is a mystery. Sometimes we do not understand why things happen, but we must always trust in the path that God lays before us. Your daughter's healing is a gift. Treasure it. Share it. Let her be a light for others. May God bless your family. In Christ's love. Francis." Tears spilled onto the page as Emily pressed it to her heart. Daniel wrapped his arms around her. Outside, the sun shone through the window, bathing Ava in golden light. Whatever had happened, whether it was science, faith, or something beyond their understanding, one thing was certain: their daughter was alive. And that was the greatest miracle of all. The weight of a miracle. The letter from Pope Francis sat on their kitchen table. It felt heavier than paper, as if the weight of something divine rested within its ink. Emily traced the edges of the parchment with her fingertips, still trying to process everything. The world saw Ava's healing as either a miracle or a medical anomaly, nothing in between. But Emily felt something else, a whisper of something unfinished, a lingering unease. She should be overjoyed, but instead, a new fear gripped her. What if this wasn't just a gift? What if it was a warning? Ava's change. At first, it was subtle. Ava had always been a quiet baby, but now she was eerily still. She didn't cry at night. She didn't fuss when she was hungry. She barely blinked when Emily spoke to her. She just stared, wide-eyed, observing. And then there was the other thing, her skin. It had always been soft and pale, but now, under the right light, it seemed to glow. A faint luminescence, like a halo. Emily convinced herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the mind, the stress of everything clouding her thoughts. Until the night she woke up to find Ava standing in her crib. A strange awakening. Emily jolted awake, her motherly instincts sensing something was off. The room was bathed in moonlight, the soft rustling of the wind outside their only company. Her eyes darted to the baby monitor. Ava was standing, perfectly balanced, gripping the railing of her crib. Emily sat up sharply. Her daughter was only 6 months old. She shouldn't be able to stand yet. Her tiny form swayed slightly, but her eyes, they were locked onto something unseen. Focused, unblinking. Then, in a voice far too clear for a baby, she whispered, "He's coming." Emily's blood ran cold. She scrambled out of bed and rushed to Ava's crib. "Ava." Her voice shook. The baby blinked. Her expression softened, and just like that, she was normal again, cooing, reaching for her mother like nothing had happened. Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She clutched her daughter to her chest, whispering desperate prayers into the darkness. Daniel's doubt. The next morning, Emily told Daniel what had happened. "She spoke, Daniel," she insisted. She said, "He's coming." Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. "Emily, she's a baby. She can't even form words yet." Emily gritted her teeth. "I know what I heard." Daniel sighed, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I think we're both overwhelmed. The miracle, the attention, the Vatican." He exhaled. "Maybe we're looking for signs where there aren't any." Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to dismiss it as exhaustion, stress, paranoia. But deep in her gut, something told her this was only the beginning. The return of the illness. 2 weeks passed. The reporters stopped calling. The cameras disappeared. Life began to settle. Until Ava stopped eating. At first, Emily thought it was just teething. Babies went through phases. But then came the nosebleeds. And the bruises. Purple blotches formed along Ava's arms and legs, the same way they had before her diagnosis. Emily's heart sank. No. They rushed her back to the hospital. Dr. Patel's face was unreadable as he scanned the latest test results. I don't understand," he muttered. Emily clenched Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What is it?" she whispered. Dr. Patel exhaled. "The leukemia. It's back." The Vatican responds. The news shattered them. Emily locked herself in the bedroom, sobbing into a pillow. Daniel buried himself in research, trying to make sense of it. How does a miracle reverse? He kept muttering. How does something just undo itself? But there were no answers. Desperate, Emily reached out to Father Michael. "We need to speak to the Vatican," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The priest agreed. Within days, another letter arrived. This one was urgent. Bishop Alessandro Romano was returning. The priest's warning. This time, the bishop arrived with another man. An older priest with deep-set eyes and a presence that made the room feel colder. Father Luca. Emily watched as they exchanged glances, as if something unspoken passed between them. Finally, Father Luca spoke. "Tell me," he said in a thick Italian accent, "did you ever wonder why Ava was chosen?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" The priest leaned forward. "Miracles do not simply reverse." He laced his fingers together. "Unless they were never meant to last." A chill ran through Emily's spine. "What are you saying?" Father Luca's expression darkened. "There is an ancient belief, a forgotten passage in early religious texts." His voice lowered. It is said that sometimes, when miracles occur without divine intention, they are borrowed. Emily's stomach churned. Borrowed. The priest nodded. There is a balance in the world. When something is given, something must be taken. Emily's heart pounded. Taken. Father Luca's eyes met hers. The question is, he paused. What was taken in return? An omen in the night. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The priest's words haunted her. She tiptoed into Ava's room, standing over her crib. The baby looked peaceful, her chest rising and falling. But then, in the dim glow of the nightlight, Emily saw something. A shadow. It wasn't cast by the crib. It wasn't cast by the moonlight. It was something else. Something watching. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Emily's breath hitched. Something was coming, and she was terrified to find out what.